be honest. Everything we read about is about people lately. And we know Agile's in a downward spiral. It's because nobody's getting the value out of it. They aren't measuring outcomes. They're measuring, the people are more interested in happiness and NPRs, or excuse me, employee satisfaction ratings, whatever, than using those 12 Agile principles. And when we read the 12 Agile principles, it says, look, we have to focus on engineering excellence. I do not believe people are today. They're not using the 12 Agile principles in the right way. They've drifted for whatever reason. It's just, we've gotten off of track of what Agile was meant to be.
So let's kick this one off. Thanks for joining our podcast today. You heard our opening salvo. This is going to be an interesting conversation. Joining me are John Miller and Dan Leahy, both colleagues of mine, both extreme edge thinkers, if you will, similar to myself, Dwayne Stroman. The topic we want to cover today that we have in a high level nutshell is just, can we have good engineering practices? And guys, we struggled with finishing that work from home mindset. John, you had some different concepts around that. But your point about, can we properly meet the true essence of the Agile Manifesto with our current culture in general? Work from home is part of it. But there's also a lot of, you mentioned the term snowflakes and you know, the sensitivity and all of those things. Can we really support the Agile Manifesto, which we all agree are still absolutely viable in today's culture?
So as you look at that, and let's just start with principle 6. Most effective way is face-to-face. So let's realize face-to-face doesn't mean physical presence. We are face-to-face right now. All three of us have videos on. We're talking, we can see people's, granted, we're not, you know, I talk with my hands when I'm in person and when I'm on screen, but we're seeing people. Shoot, I was in a class last week, over 30, probably 40% of the people refused to turn on their video. They refused. We're not face-to-face at that point, period.
No. And it's
John,
back
to what
to that.
extent
Go ahead,
does
Dan.
that reflect a lack of engagement?
Well, it means somebody's double tasking, multitasking, triple tasking. They're shopping Amazon.
Yeah.
They're shopping eBay. They're writing a letter. Whatever it is, they're not working. They're not in the moment.
Yeah.
And John, that's where I think the danger comes in. We don't know that for sure. It's the perception. And that is like a really evil worm that gets into our thinking. Dan's not really engaged because he's got his video off. And it could be that he's trying to deal with something, bring up a slide for the conversation. He could be absolutely engaged, but the perception is there. And as we know, perception is 99% of reality. And so now I'm thinking, well, Dan doesn't care, neither do I. What's on my Facebook post? We all fall into that. And that's where we're building the wrong kind of system. And you mentioned that, you know, however politically correct we can mention it, that it's not okay to challenge people on that. It's become a negative thing. I mean, we do in class and with clients all the time. Please turn your video on. If you're going to participate, turn your video on. Otherwise, you're off to the side. And honestly, I don't care. Now, are there extenuating circumstances? Absolutely. You know, I've got to get up, move around a little bit for something like that. But you quickly know the difference if someone's just refusing to put video on.
Yeah, and Dwayne, you made it clear. It's like, look, so if you throw out a request, if I said, "Hey Dan, got a question for you. Here's a question," and Dan's not nodding his head, and there's a pause for just long enough, and you have to say, "Hey Dan, I'm sorry, I just wasn't listening right then." It's like, no, you're not listening at all.
Right.
And everybody sees that in the Zoom meetings they're in.
And it's like, okay, you know, you're not engaged. We hear a lot about the younger professionals, not just in IT, but everywhere, struggling to be engaged, or saying that they don't feel engaged, yet at the same time uh,
They
they
choose not to
are
be.
clamoring for
Yeah.
something to be engaged with. I mean, I think they're expressing that they deeply desire that, but they're not finding it. So that's a paradox I've thought deeply about, having kids that age, and wondering, like, when we were in those early years in our career, obviously very different times, and very different ways of working back then. But how can we create teams, environments that that will draw people and into us? I think it has to be a pull system, not a push, like most things we do.
So I have long advocated for the, I believe he's Hungarian sociologist, and I'm going to get the, or psychologist. The pronunciation, I believe, is Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, something like that. Anyways, his study was incredibly powerful, enlightening, where he discovered that people are happiest when they have two things in place: a significant challenge and the ability to meet it. If you have a significant challenge and you limit their ability to meet it, in other words, every decision centralized, I can't have people to collaborate with, their videos are off or whatever, it's incredibly frustrating. But when we're happiest, we've got this challenge and we have the ability to meet it. It's a significant challenge. And principle number 4, business people and developers must work together daily throughout the project. I love James Copling's statement that roughly says, Agile is a way of working that leads to a way of thinking. It's a way of doing. Principle 4 is a direct thing. Here's what you should do. The reasoning behind it is to get into, as Mihai is talking about, that zone time. Now, does that mean business people are working with the teams all day long? Of course not. They have to be part of the business or they can't be effective. But when those teams are in the zone and business people come to work with them and they immerse in the zone rather than, oh, hey, stop doing that, I need you to do this instead, that's when it's most effective. They're contributing to that zone time rather than disrupting it.
Mhm.
And that zone time, to me, principles 7 through 11, that's the zone time. That's that technical side. But go back to, this doesn't mean, think of in-person work and think of team rooms and the conversations that go on in team rooms. And every organization I work with anymore, I ask a really simple question. So tell me when I can join your team that's working together in a team room environment. Everybody's got videos on and everybody's doing work, and you're just having conversations when you need to talk. And nobody does that. I
Yeah.
don't get positive response. And if you don't have that, they say, well, we set up a meeting, then you have the agenda and everything else, and you're not just having a conversation. Now it becomes agenda driven.
Yep. And it's not zone time. It's about, I showed up at the meeting. What else can you ask of me? I was there. Come on. Were you contributing to the conversation? Well, I was there. And this is really where I look at how much did the COVID shift and all those things really negatively impact us. I can think back to 2014, 15, a client I was working with had a distributed team kind of approach. They had some people in Chicago, some people in India, and on their own, they created the internal team process of, as soon as the Chicago team got in, which they would start at like 7 a.m. to meet more with the India work time. As soon as they got in, they started a go-to meeting session. It was just an open session, and they left it open for 4 hours. And it was wide open conversation. The India team joined in as soon as the Chicago team opened it up. And it was, hey, Dan, how was your evening? Oh, it was pretty good. So here's what we were thinking about. Here's what we found so far before you came in, from the India team. And then it was just open conversation. And I would join it once in a while. And there were times when it was quiet. It was, people were just working away and they would look at some, hey, Dan, did you look at this thing? Yeah, I did. Here's what I was finding. And it was just zone time, and it didn't have to be noisy or chaotic, but it was part of the team mantra. And no one complained about being on camera or anything like that. It's just what they did to collaborate.
So that sounds like a team that had a high level of pre-established trust.
It did. They did. And very significant leadership. When I started working with this company, you know the drill. We come in and we start looking for the true lean agile mindsets, whether they know it, that's what they have or not,
Yep.
but they have that it factor. And this person definitely had it. And he had recommended, come up with the idea, and the team was all for it. Why? Because he'd already built that kind of a culture. He had already built that kind of a thinking process about collaboration is the essence of it. His peers thought he was crazy. Why would you do that? Why don't you just hand off the task to the India team? Well, because that's not how we really deliver value. It's not the Agile manifesto.
So why is that still the prevailing way of working?
Man, that's the $64 million question, isn't it?
I've got a theory. And by the way, so my theories are coming from reading a bunch of studies that have now been done on the drifting downwards of collaboration and trust in the work from home environment. And again, I don't really care if people are working from home or working from the office. Our level of collaboration is drifting down. So it's
Yeah.
not, this is not an argument for or against anybody sitting anywhere. We're not collaborating. And we know that in order to build good products, product excellence requires collaboration. And how do we increase that? There's a great study from Microsoft. This is a few years ago now. And they said pretty much what you just said, Dan, is that if a team was together before everybody went home, their level of collaboration trust carried at a constant rate until they started replacing team members. And then those team members, it started drifting down. And I believe it's because they chose to not have core hours.
Oh,
Mhm.
Because you can't build trust on a team. You know, it's in the organizations we work with where people are in team rooms. When you first start out, everybody complains. Well, I have to do this back at my desk. It's like, okay, so go, but then come back in here. In the current world, I can't tell you how many times even the daily stand-ups, people are just phoning it in or dropping a note into Slack because they were busy or they were out walking the dog or grocery shopping during daily stand-up. And it's like, okay, so we're not doing the agile fundamentals anymore.
Yeah.
We don't trust.
Well, I also think one of the key contributors is lack of accountability. Teams that create a, whether stated or unstated, that accountability factor. If you are going to be on this team, here's the standards we have. We will be on camera throughout the day. Oh man, I hate being on camera. If you're in the office, you're on camera all day. It's not like you can go into your cube and turn the camera off. You're still on camera. And that's not a good way to work anyways, even if you do hide in your cube type of thing.
right.
But how is that any different from being in the office all day? You don't have to drive into work. You get those advantages, but we still have the collaboration. But we've turned this into, yeah, but being on camera is uncomfortable. It's taxing, no more so than being in person.
Yeah.
So it's an accountability thing to me, holding people accountable to it.
Yeah. Well, and honestly, by extension, holding people accountable to outcomes, and not outside of the team. You know, we talk a lot about how we measure the team performance at a team level, but within the team, are we meeting each other's expectations, or are we meeting the expectations that we are the commitments to our teammates? You know, am I available to collaborate with you on something, as we discussed? Am I, you know, if I said I was going to work to prep something so we could work on it together, you know, am I getting it done? We've had periods of time, you know, it seems like every decade there's some sort of cycle of, you know, developers are impossible to find, developers are plentiful, and we had this accordion approach to, you know, do we need to be do we need to treat developers with kid gloves, or can we have unreasonable expectations? I think both of those things are a malady. But instead, how about we treat our developers, young developers, as young professionals that have a burgeoning career that they should be paying attention to, and develop it as a career, not as, well, I'm working at PDQ Corp and I'll be there 3 years and then I'm going to ladder my way up, sit with my butt in a chair, not necessarily contributing, but just, laddering up, one chair to the next.
So there's the challenge. And that's why how I'd like to wrap this podcast up is people listening to this are thinking, well, okay, so let's say I agree with your premise is that cultural, all of these different issues comes down to the physical things we do, like being on camera, being accountable. But how does the average advocate of Agile, how does the average implementer make these changes? How do they get organizations and leadership and team members to think differently? So, John, you're bringing up the 5 dysfunctions of a team.
Yep. And we've touched on every one of these. And this is where the Agile 12 principles meet team dysfunctionality. And Dan, you mentioned commitment and accountability and results. Dwayne, you were talking about accountability. I mentioned trust. It's, this is Lencioni's model. And it says, look, how do we build, we get into the first step, which is how do we build the fundamental, the foundation. And that's trust. And that means working together. And again, we've had groups of people that are being called an Agile team that aren't.
Yeah. Well, it's back.
That's a hard reality, but it's true.
That's right.
Yeah. It's back to my old adage, theoretically, there's no such thing as an Agile team. There are teams striving towards agility. We have way too many teams, big air quotes, that say, oh, we're Agile. Well, we do daily stand-ups. We do this, we do that. No, it's the internal mindset about relentless improvement, always trying to get better, always striving to build more trust, to have more good conflict, to build more commitment, to follow those things. That's what an Agile team is one that's always trying to get better. And I think we lose sight of that should be our mission statement.
Mm-hmm.
If we sign on with a new company, we take that new position. I don't care if it's my first job out of college or it's my 20th position at my age type of thing. It doesn't matter. My goal should be you are paying me to care. You are paying me to help solve problems. Now, leadership has really skewed that because they have even the message of, no, I'm paying you to write code. No, you're not. You are paying those people to help solve problems. And as soon as you make that mental shift, now you look at Dan and say, Dan's really good in Java and he's really good at database and he's really good at this. But here's what we need. Dan, how can you help? Oh, yeah, well, that's kind of tangential, but I'd love to jump in and help with that. Absolutely. It's about how can I help the organization move forward?
Yeah, that shift from looking at our team members and wanting them to work efficiently, and instead, as a team, work effectively to deliver value.
That's the key, isn't it?
It's a profoundly different mindset. And when a team shifts to being focused at our daily stand-ups, are we doing those awful 3 questions, or are we saying, okay, it's, we're 6 days out now. What do we need to replan in order to meet our commitments? And let's all figure out how we're going to help the best, and then do that.
So Dan, we better explain, because I think all 3 of us agree with that when you said those awful 3 questions.
Oh,
can you explain?
It's the very, very early ideas from Scrum that suggested that every day we would have a stand up, and in that stand up, everyone would stand up and say, Hi, my name's Dan. Yesterday I did this. Today I'm going to do this. I don't have any blockers, which is just a micro status meeting. It
It
doesn't
is.
suggest in any way how we can strategic or tactically at that point replan and engage others on the team to work again more effectively, not on what I originally thought I was going to plan, because a lot happens each day. The idea is that as a team we're saying, okay, that thing yesterday really kicked my butt. Hopefully somebody jumps in and says, hey, I can, let's partner on that, because I've done that thing before. So then all of a sudden I get smarter because John jumped in and showed
Yeah.
me the thing that I had no idea John even could spell that. Turns out he's done it for like years. It's that sort of high trust collaboration where I can be vulnerable and not feel like I'm putting myself in a vulnerable position, and the next time there's a little bit of softness in the market, I'm going to be the one cut. It's that we know that we can be open and well, trusting with each other.
Hey, Dan, because you're talking daily stand-up, I don't
Yeah.
remember when I heard this the first time from Dwayne, but Dwayne compared it to a huddle, a
Yeah.
football huddle.
NFL
Yeah,
football
a
huddle.
perfect metaphor.
And
Yep.
when you're in there,
Yep.
you were all on the field yesterday all day. You were all on the field in the last play. You don't have to tell somebody, hey, did you see I ran down exactly 10 steps and then took a hard right for my post and then stopped? And boy, I was exactly where the quarterback wanted me.
It's like, yeah, dude, we were there.
That's an
Move
indicator
on.
that they're not collaborating all day long.
It's a
Yeah.
collection of people, not a team. And
Yep.
Dan, you gave a
Oh,
great
yes,
example.
Yes, sure.
You and I have worked together in the past, and we've had that very scenario.
That's right.
Now, excuse me, it was very much a, hey, Dan, we were working on this thing together. Man, I really ran into this stumbling block. I know you, John, didn't you do something similar to this in the past? Yeah. So can we work together on this afterwards? Yeah, absolutely. Is that the most important thing, team? Yeah, it is. Absolutely. That's a daily stand-up. That's an adjustment, a team sync, as Scaled Agile calls it. The whole concept again of the football play, if the receiver goes back to the huddle and says, okay, I ran down 10 yards, I did a button hook, I didn't get thrown the ball. We all know that. We were all in the same play. And that's part of the isolation we've created. And I think the work from home, hybrid, all of that has just amplified it, is isolation. We have created more collections of people than true teams, because a true team looks around and says, what can I do to help? What's next for us to accomplish? And how do I contribute to this with my skill sets and my capacity and so forth? Rather than, what task do I have? Okay, see you in a week. That's not a team.
Right.
All right, let's wrap this one up, guys. This was a good conversation. There's hundreds of conversations back around this. We'll probably revisit this, but for now, thanks, guys. I appreciate you jumping in. Hopefully people got a different way of thinking, a different perspective about this. Again, the challenge is once you start to see that different horizon, that different approach, it's what are the steps you can start to take to move towards that. No one in this group, the three of us, are not expecting anyone to make a turnaround overnight. Doesn't happen. But what's the next step you do that gets you closer and closer and closer? So thanks, guys. Let's wrap this one up and we'll talk soon.
See y'all.
Yep.